And we're live. I've really been looking forward to this. As you know, if you've seen these before, we usually jump right into the content. But I think today it's appropriate to start with a lighthearted where you're joining us from, Olivia, because I'm curious myself.
Honestly, Keith, I'm also curious. Someone needs to keep track of me. I am calling in actually from the Dolomites in Italy. I was not supposed to be here today, but that's, we're playing it by ear.
That is an absolutely stunning place. I was there a couple of years ago. Now I'm super curious. What city are you in?
So I'm in a very small town called Corvara. And the reason I'm here, I got a little bit stuck here, but my dad is a huge skiing fanatic and I'm his ski buddy. And it was his birthday. And so we came out here to ski. And one thing led to the next, and I accidentally got stuck out here. So it's.
Well, we should let folks know that there's a transportation strike
in Brussels.
That's going
yes.
on. Because folks might hypothesize you just were off on the slopes and it was also beautiful or something like that. But you were supposed to be in a different country by today. But
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us. I've been very much looking forward to this, and responsible AI, which is your career and the subject of your book, is really something that we're passionate about at Further, because of course the person who leads data science and AI at Further, Cal. Know him quite well. So let's jump right in. But again, thank you for navigating the transportation strike to join us. So I wanted to start with, and I'll hold up your book here in a second, but I got a little turned around at the beginning myself. So what I wanted to start with is just kind of an observation that, as consultants, we often meet clients because they tried to go it on their own and it didn't work out so well, and they're kind of stuck. And I don't know how many projects that I've been a part of that have been either a second attempt or they've been, this time we want to do it right, or something like that. And you don't explicitly, I don't think you explicitly refer to that in the book, but I'm guessing it might also be true of you and the work that you do with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. I think the power of a consultant is the ability to bring in a fresh perspective after you've tried over and over again and you feel like you've gotten stuck. Bringing in that external ideas and a new perspective, I feel like creates a lot of momentum forward when you can feel like you've tried all the angles you can possibly think of.
So how do, when clients do get stuck in your world, focusing on AI ethics, what do they get stuck on, and then how do they find you?
Well, lately it feels like I am helping people that are both stuck on AI ethics, responsible AI, but also AI in general. And honestly, I would say it's a couple different factors that have led to that feeling of almost frustration or inertia of where do I even move forward from. On the AI side, we're at a point in time where AI can impact every single aspect of a business. And so when you can do everything, you get stuck. You sit there and you go, well, what do I need to do? And so that's a lot of the inertia that I find in terms of AI. But then on the responsible AI and ethics side, it comes down to this fear of, I need to be perfect from the start. If we don't have this perfect right away, if we don't know exactly what we're doing right away, then we are opening ourselves up to liabilities. Then we are, it's either 0 or 100. There's no in between at times. And so again, that creates this inertia to do anything out of fear. And so I'm coming in and saying, okay, you actually start at 0 and you work your way up. It doesn't have to be at 100 right away. But it's interesting trying to balance a lot of conflicting fears of move fast. We don't want to fall behind in terms of AI. And then we have no idea how to start. And we're a little bit afraid of it as well at the same time.
Does part of that, you think, come from that they may have kind of a poor or incomplete understanding of what others are doing with AI? And do you encounter folks that think that everybody else is already that they're already behind, when probably what we observe is everybody's still in the starting blocks?
Yes, this is, I guess, maybe the dirty secret of the industry. No one knows what they're doing. If anyone claims they know what they're doing in AI, they really don't know what they're doing then. This space is moving too fast. There's too many variables. We still have a lot of companies even just trying initial use cases. So you may feel like you're behind because a lot of the marketing is pointing towards we're doing all these things with AI and AI and AI. But in reality, the actual application and adoption and build of these systems is a little bit, well, far further behind than I think you would feel just reading LinkedIn feeds.
Yeah, and it's remarkable when you think about it, because large language models are so new. As often as we read about it, I mean, every morning in our LinkedIn feed, there's something about large language models. But, we're still like 18 to 24 months in from when this really changed our world. So, further, we've done a number of projects with large language models, but gosh, there must be consultants out there that are still like on their first one, because it's all so new. And
Mm-hmm.
you get the impression sometimes that folks think, that, folks have done dozens and dozens of these projects. Well, no way. It's only been a couple of years.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about something else that really rang true for me, but I bet folks find to be surprising. I was a philosophy minor, by the way, and in an alternate universe, I would do PhD work in philosophy, but I wasn't able to find a way to make it a career, so I got just kind of scared, and I went more, towards tech. But it's always been something I've been passionate about. You mentioned that when clients push back a little bit when you're working with them about what they perceive as the subjectivity of ethics, you remind them that really all of data science has subjectivity to it. And that instantly resonated with me. But I'm sure that some clients are shocked or even don't quite buy it, like they think it's a line or something, right? But if you could talk a bit about that, maybe starting with the data science part, because that's the more surprising part, and then how you use that as a way to help them understand that the subjectivity in ethics really isn't that surprising.
Yeah. And this is true across any industry, any field, any discipline. There is always a layer of subjectivity. It just so happens that in the field of ethics, it feels more prominent, but we'll dive into that in a second. So when we're looking at the field of data science, let's use something as simple as data labeling. There's a lot of subjectivity in there, even though it may seem like, we have our source of truth, we're labeling the data, done. Then there's no subjectivity there. That is the objective truth. Well, there's actually a great story of, and I can't claim this. This came from another researcher, but there is this great story of labeling these data sets of pictures of cats, of cat, not cat, cat, not cat. And then that data set is then used to create some like automatic door opener for your cat. Like it can register and see, your cat's outside and it's trying to come in. And so it's implemented, and one day someone comes home and they find a lion sitting in their living room. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but the whole idea there is if you have someone that is labeling the data and to them, they think, okay, well, a lion is a cat, then they're going to label that cat. And this is a very, very simple and slightly humorous example of there is subjectivity in that data labeling. How someone understands the definition of something can be very different and can be influenced by an individual's subjective perspective and their context. That's one layer. A whole other layer within data science is you can pick what kind of metrics of success you're going for. Let's say you choose accuracy. Well, that is a subjective choice. Yes, you may have reasoning for why you chose that, but it is still a subjective choice. That may not have been the same choice another person would make. Carrying this into the field of ethics, ethics works in the same way. We're working with these similar principles. We have strong understanding, say, of privacy, but that concept of privacy may change depending on the context that it's being operated in. It doesn't mean that the principle itself, it doesn't mean that the practice of ethics is subjective. There is that root truth that you're then working on how to apply that. And you're using the same reasoning skills as you would be as a data scientist for reasoning, hey, we're going to use accuracy as our metric of success in ethics. Hey, we're going to pick privacy and this definition of privacy as one of our core principles because of X, Y, and Z reason. It's the same kind of reasoning, same layers of subjectivity in there, but we are using some objective reasoning in both of those fields.
Yeah, I love all of those examples, actually, because they really hit upon some important things. So, and by the way, I don't think the cat example is silly at all. Cal loves to include cats and other animals in all of his talks, as you probably know. So he would love that example. And I'm so glad you brought up the labeling too, because that's kind of a different topic than our topic today. But you know, there's so many examples. I actually worked some years ago. I worked for a couple of years for a company that specialized in data labeling. That's what they did.
Yeah.
And you know, Andrew Ng talks about this all the time with pictures of like two bicycles next to each other, and then where they overlap. Which bicycle does that belong to, or what are you doing with the negative space? It's a little bit hard to talk about this without a visual, but there's a lot of debate. So unless you have really good unless first you establish a consensus on how it's supposed to be labeled, and then communicate that to the labelers, who, by the way, might work for an external company, then your data is going to be a mess. And your project's failed before you even start to build the model, right? So it's really, and then return on investment's always been a big theme for me. You know, so you were talking about the different ways of accuracy, and that jumped out at me in the book too.
Yeah.
But you know, when I sit down with someone and I walk them through a simple question, like what would be more painful for you? You know, a false positive from the model or a false negative from the model, right? And if you're talking about insurance claim, or if you're talking about cancer diagnosis, you get different answers for these kinds of things. The moment that conversation starts, somebody immediately recognizes that that's not just a technical decision to delegate to a data scientist, but it's fundamentally a business decision. And privacy for leads is different than privacy for existing customers, you know?
Exactly. I actually have a great example there, Keith, of the false positive versus false negative. So I was leading a team, and we were working with a client who was developing a system. I'm trying to be careful here. They were developing an algorithm to be used in the healthcare system, essentially. And we were auditing the system, and we flagged up, hey, you have a lot of false positives that you're allowing through. And in normal, you know, in general circumstances, this is too high of a rate of false positives. And they came back to us and they said, we know that's on purpose, because this company actually set up a board of clinicians, and it was the board of clinicians that domain feedback and that they were bringing into the design of their models, because the clinicians were saying, we actually need that high false positive, because if we misdiagnose and give a false negative, that is far more consequential than a false positive. And we got that information back and went, got it. Okay, we'll actually adjust what we're auditing for, because you're bringing in what I like to call, actually, and it's a very important aspect of developing these AI systems on responsible foundations, is having that direct feedback loop with domain experts, with people that actually are coming into contact with your system. But just an example there of something so simple of having to contextualize false negative, false positive, however you're focusing and determining accuracy of these systems, that also needs contextualization.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, it can be an order of magnitude or more, right? Like in insurance fraud type situation. It might
Yeah.
cost several $1,000s to investigate a claim and verify that it's fraud. It could be, well, it's almost certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars if it is a false negative and it goes to litigation.
Mm.
And then that
Exactly.
money, once it's lost, even if you got a criminal conviction, you're not going to get that $250,000 or $500,000 back, right? So what are some examples of, you mentioned privacy, but what are some examples of that subjectivity with ethics? And then kind of what is the client experience of hearing this and having that light bulb go off that wow, this isn't like the model's not going to make these decisions for me, that there are some decisions that I have to make.
Yeah. So let's talk about the principles, for example, in this case. So we have general, what you can call the responsible AI principles. These are ones that you're going to find in policies, global policies. So the European Union, South American policies, all the way over to Chinese policies. You'll generally find more or less the same set of principles appearing across the board. And these are ones that you hear, I almost use them as buzzwords now. It's things like transparency, privacy, responsibility, autonomy. These are all ones that you're finding across the board. Those I like to call kind of the objective principles, meaning they're recognized globally, they're recognized across industries. We all generally agree, hey, these are good principles when it comes to building AI systems. Now, the subjectivity layer in, and this is how I start to bring it into the context of the company and how I make that subjective part a lot less scary. Because if you say there's some subjective parts to ethics, companies go, oh, well, we don't want to tread in the wrong direction. That starts to make us nervous. So how I talk about the subjectivity of ethics in the context of business is contextualization specifically. So we may have a principle like privacy, but that's an overarching general principle. What I want to know is what does privacy mean to you, let's say, as your company? But then not only for you as your company, what does it mean for your data science team? How does privacy look in action for your data science team versus your marketing team? You're going to have different definitions. And so with clients, it's this process of going layer by layer into these definitions, co-designing these definitions so that you're bringing in the context of the company, the industry, and the global markets that company is operating in. That technically is subjectivity, but really it's contextualization in the business. And you want to have that layer of contextualization instead of the one size fits all, because we all know when you try to make one size fits all, it breaks. So this starts to customize those principles so that you can actually function. They actually become applicable instead of abstract sitting on the wall somewhere.
That's very helpful, because if I can see how I can almost picture a client's body language reacting to that, kind of like, oh, well, if it's subjective, I don't want to decide. And they like turn to their coworkers and say, what you should decide, that kind of thing. But if you're simply going through identifying that context as a series of facts about the data, for instance, one thing the marketing team wouldn't have to worry about is HIPAA.
Yeah, exactly.
There might be all kinds of privacy issues that they do have to worry about, but they're not going to, the marketing team probably isn't going to have X-rays. One would be as to why that's the case. So if you're simply describing it in detail, it's not unlike what you do when you do like a security audit or those kinds of things. It's just applying a lot of facts that tease out this context. So I'm actually going to jump to something else, because you made me think of it when you were talking about EU and EU Act and on all that kind of stuff. How, I'm sure this comes up from time to time. I'm sure that sometimes somebody approaches you because they're worried about, the regulations. Do clients sometimes conflate ethics with compliance? There's certainly overlap there, but they're not the same. So is the regulation often the inspiration, and do they think that if we just simply deal with the regulation that we've done enough? Does that issue come up?
It depends a bit on I'm going to say the commonality or the pattern that I see is industry dependent. So industries like, let's say, finance or health, where they have a long history of regulation of having to needing compliance, those companies operating in those industries are more inspired, seems like a funny word to use here, but their driver is more on the regulation compliance side. It's just part of how they've done business. It is ingrained in industry standards. So for them, it's much more of a driver of, we do need to remain compliant, and we need to be regulatory ready, especially with the pace at how things are moving. Other companies, I would say, come at it more from we need to accelerate our innovation. And I know that sounds almost contradictory to, hey, we need to be regulatory ready. But the companies that are approaching it as an innovation enabler are companies that are looking sometimes in highly regulated spaces, but they're looking at this seeing their teams struggle on a day-to-day basis of going, where am I allowed to develop? I know that I need to be safe. I know that I need to have all these different considerations, and now I'm slowed down because I can't sort through everything all at once. And so when you're bringing in responsible AI practices in those cases, you actually can enable and speed up innovation because you're equipping your teams with the direction they need to move in. And so I see that as well being a driver. And if I'm being honest, the teams that come from the point of view, the perspective that this is an innovation accelerator, those are teams that are much more ready in terms of adoption of responsible AI practices and get far more out of those practices than teams that are mainly looking at this as a compliance practice.
Yeah, I think that's true across AI in so many areas that if the focus is on enablement, it just completely changes the tone as opposed to avoiding pain. But I'll tell you what inspired the question, and I think you've partially answered this aspect of it already. Is a colleague of mine, and if he watches this, he may even recognize himself in the observation. But he said, oh, Keith, it's so interesting. You do AI and responsible AI. He said, I work a lot with chief compliance officers. Would they be in charge of that? And my initial reaction was, probably not. I bet most industries that have chief compliance officers, this isn't on their radar yet. Because, naturally, I'm going to think that AI is going to be more on the IT side and on the tech side, and that they'll probably have that responsibility for it. But how would you answer that same question? Do you think chief compliance officers, and they're going to tend to be financial firms, big banks, things like that, will have that role? Do you think this is on their radar yet?
It's on their radar. They're usually not the ones that own it, though. So it's something that keeps them up at night. I've met a lot of legal teams and chief compliance officers sitting there going, help. This isn't my responsibility, but I'm terrified because I know that these things are at play.
Well, and somebody with a financial or legal background doesn't want to have to make a subjective judgment call, probably, right? That's probably the opposite of their training, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the other challenge for them too is we only have some regulation. So I know that sounds a little funny to say, considering we're watching the EU AI Act come into effect. That only applies to the EU market. Granted, the EU market is very large and a lot of the other regulations are following, but at the same time, we're watching in the US market where there's nothing. Even the executive order was pulled, so we have no reference point to even work with in the US when it comes to what do we need to comply with, unless you're looking at some state level regulations. There's not much there. So even for a chief compliance officer, they can decide either they operate in the EU market, but if they're not operating in the EU market, hey, let's try and follow the EU AI Act. And even then, the EU AI Act is still a bit of a question of how that actually is playing out. Yes, we just had a couple of the key action points going into effect, I think about a week ago. But we still don't know how member states are going to be monitoring those. So there's still so many questions that there's really not the solid ground that compliance officers need doesn't exist yet.
No, that resonates with me. Yeah. There's just a lot of confusion. But to be clear about executive order. I don't think it was pulled exactly. It was replaced with a sentence that the U.S. will be the leaders in AI.
Yes, I should
Okay.
rephrase that. Of
No, I happened to see a post. Cal did a post about that. So
yes, yeah,
we won't
exactly.
we won't go down that rabbit hole. But that was the impression that I gave, is that it was replaced with another executive order that was a bit more brief than the previous one.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway, a topic for another day.
Full
I got so caught up in trying to find out what time zone you were in and where you were joining us from. I forgot to mention that for those that are out there, please let us know in the comments where you're joining from. That's always interesting indeed to see. So I mentioned I admitted my love of philosophy. So I have to ask you a little bit of a philosophical question. I think you handle this beautifully, by the way, in the beginning of the book. In the book is also just a really nice read. Some philosophers write beautifully, and some philosophers can be almost opaque, right? And I think you've managed to do wonderful work and write beautifully.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Some philosophers are famously like opaque, right?
Yes.
It's almost part of the fun when you study philosophy, to see if you can be the one to figure out what on earth they're talking about, right? But I found your book almost conversational wouldn't be the right way to describe it. Anyway, I just really enjoyed reading. And one of the things that you were talking about was kind of diffusing this issue of, we've talked about ethics being subjective, but embracing that. But I think you also address quite well that ethics really isn't like this abstract thing. Like I'm sure that a lot of folks just think, oh, it's just virtue. If we're just all virtuous, we don't have to worry about ethics. Or is it like the kind of thought experiments one does in freshman philosophy, with John Stuart Mill or that kind of stuff, which can be interesting because sometimes people get hooked on philosophy with those kind of thought experiments. But your work is really none of those things, right? You talk about how it's really applied ethics. Can you just revisit that topic a little bit because clients must get a little bit turned around about that, right? They think it's going to be a bit like their freshman philosophy class, and it's really
not. It's a balancing act to keep the conversation, to entertain conversations around some of these existential questions or even thought experiments, because that's a lot of people's introduction into this space. So balancing that with actual practical conversations, when it comes down to it, it's pretty cut and dry space. You can be creative within it, but setting up responsible AI practices it's good business practice, and it's frankly kind of boring sometimes. It's pretty straightforward. It's not this, we're debating what person the self-driving car is going to run over.
Oh yeah, the trolley problem. You mentioned that in the book. Did clients actually bring that up? You were kind of saying, what does it mean about humanity that we seem so fascinated with
who to kill with the trolley problem? I think over the years, that's been less and less of the default of people's examples. We've had the general education around ethics, at least in the space of AI, has slowly but surely risen over the past couple of years. But honestly, the first handful of years that I was in this space, and especially with speaking, I can't tell you how many people were like, oh, hey, Hitler or the baby, who are we going to run over? And I don't know why that's the choice that people always go towards, but it was always Hitler or the baby, who are we going to run over? Anyway, I've gotten us completely off track here, and I apologize, Keith. I forgot the question.
Oh, I was saying that you observe in the book that what people imagine ethics to be is virtue or these kind of abstract questions, and what makes applied ethics different? Yes.
So let me see. The easiest way to explain this is to do a very, very, very brief history of ethics. We have meta ethics, we have normative ethics, and we have applied ethics. Meta ethics is this field that deals with questions of what is good? What is the term bad? What does this mean? It's very, very high level and can be a bit heady. That's where a lot of these existential conversations and questions come about. So you have the meta. What is good? Then you get down to normative ethics, and that is what is a right action? What is a good action? It's very based on you are analyzing specific actions and decisions there. And normative ethics is where you start to hear about these fields. People will talk about like Kantian ethics, deontological, utilitarian, virtue ethics. Those are all normative frameworks. Those are all frameworks designed for you to be able to determine this action is good, this action is bad, and so on. Applied ethics is the layer underneath that all. And what applied ethics does is it looks at very specific contexts. So AI ethics is an applied ethics practice. We're looking at the context, the field of AI, and we're asking what is the right action in this context based off of and it can be in any number amount of factors, but given this scenario, what is the right action to move us forward? And in the case of ethics, we're using those values, those principles, as the key decision-making factors to help us determine what is the right action, what is the right decision in this context, in this model, in this data set, and so on.
Yeah, and what it makes me think of is we have a process that we take clients through. We have two AI strategists, and some of what you do would overlap with their responsibilities, but they have to do a lot of things. But basically, in my experience, most clients, when you first sit down with them, can't really articulate what that context is. Yeah. And I'm sure that resonates with you, but it may be surprising to others that that's the case. But the feeling is, let's start with, is this technology that we want to build possible? Do we have the data to support it? Great. Then let's go right to prototype. And after the prototype, once we prove that it's possible, then we'll talk about who will use it and how it will be used and so on. And a lot of clients think that way, but you can't design a solution to a problem that you haven't identified. So that same process that we have to go through to help them build the predictive model is that same context that you do that you need for what you do. So I thought that since we have a few minutes to go through it, I would love to, talk kind of substantively about the values canvas and where, where it came, a little bit of the history of it, but then also what is the process like of you working with clients on the values canvas, which is one way of getting at this context that we've been talking about just now. And I'm even curious about like who's in the room and how long it takes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And the great thing about the values canvas too is it is such a versatile tool that I honestly am still finding new ways that I'm using it. And this is my tool that I developed and I still run across context. And I'm like, oh, that thing was really helpful actually. So I can give you a couple of the general ways that I use this.
Well, of course, people will need to know what it is first. I mean, I'm familiar with it from the book, but so you may have to kind of describe at a high level the kinds of questions and the kind of context that's itemized in the values. Even like the 3 pillars, maybe, or something. Like that to get at.
So the values canvas, if you come from an entrepreneur background, you'll be familiar with something called the business model canvas. If you don't, it's actually a really cool tool to look up as well. But essentially, the business model canvas maps the 9 elements of what you need to build a company. It's pretty straightforward. It's got leading questions. Every single entrepreneur has filled one out, but it essentially helps you map, what do I need? What am I missing? I designed the values canvas with that same intention. So I was having clients come to me over and over again saying, what do I need? What am I missing? What do I need to build responsible AI? And what am I missing? I'm not sure. And so, okay, there we go. I have no idea how good this Wi-Fi is. And sometimes I keep lagging. So I pause there for a second.
It seems to be okay. Yeah. But I imagine in the mountains, you were worried about that, but it seems to be okay.
Yes. Thank you. I froze there for me for a second. So with the values canvas, it's designed to answer, what do I need and what am I missing in terms of responsible AI foundations? And how I describe this is the 9 elements you need to be able to develop AI systems at scale for the long term, for sustainable AI systems at scale. So the values canvas has 3 pillars. You have people, process, technology. AI is never just a technical problem. It's actually a very holistic process and challenge. So you're looking at people who is building or using AI, this technology. Then you're looking at process. How are they building or using AI? And then finally you get to technology, and that is, what are they building? So you even heard me say, I started with people. And I will say this over and over again, AI is about the people. You need to go to the people first. So each of these 3 pillars are divided into 3 elements. And how the values canvas works is you go through each of these different elements. There's prompting questions, and it's asking, what kind of solution do you have in place? How you use the values canvas is you actually start with your principles. So let's say we'll use privacy again, since that's one that we've brought up a couple of times. So you'd start with privacy, and you'd come to the values canvas, and you'd go through each of the 9 elements and answer, this is how privacy is being embedded into our education. This is how privacy is being embedded into our KPIs. This is how privacy is being embedded into our communication habits and protocols. I just ran you through the people pillar of the values canvas. And you repeat this again for the process and technology, but what you end up with is a map of, hey, this is all the pieces that I'm missing. Or the pieces that I'm missing, or the pieces that I have a lot of strength and a lot of resources in. And you run it through with each of these values. So it becomes a really powerful tool to help you identify the impact points, but also be able to create and ideate the solutions that fit to your company and your needs.
So I'm curious about the logistics of this when you use it. For instance, we like to do an AI strategy workshop with clients when possible, to kind of kick things off. And it's always an interesting question to identify who should be in the room. Who participates in this process, in your experience?
I'm a classic consultant. It depends.
Okay.
It depends specifically on where it's being applied. So if you're using the values canvas to create an overarching strategy, essentially the responsible AI foundations to an AI strategy, then you're looking at leadership. You need leadership, and quite literally every head of a department in that room, because it touches on all different departments and all different aspects within the business. So you need leadership in the room there. Now, let's say though you are working on a specific project and you're trying to embed a specific value into a product. Then you're working with the product team. And there you need a designer, you need an engineer, and you need your product manager at least in the room handling it from there. This is what I mean by it can be a very, very versatile tool. You need the decision makers essentially present, because they're going to be the ones.
But my follow-up to that is that a lot of times something starts in one line of business. Let's say marketing, for instance, right? So if they're gonna, it could even be just your classic next best offer type thing. Or well, actually, let's go with the hot one now, which is everybody wants a chatbot, right?
Yes.
So in some way, right? But let's say that's going to really solve a marketing purpose. So it's online retail, and they're going to add chatbot type interaction there. It's probably tough to get leadership outside of that line of business, right? Because they're going to feel like, oh, that's marketing's project or what have you. So, in something, kind of a more specific situation like that, who do you typically try to get in the room, and then who do you succeed in getting in the room?
Well, obviously marketing.
Yep.
Obviously we're getting in the head of marketing there. My question would be whether or not the chatbot was being built internally. If it's being built internally, then we need the product manager in the room. If we are procuring it, then we need whoever heads up procurement. And I know I'm saying this with a little bit of hesitation there, meaning it depends on the size of the company. Beyond that, I would say in the case in that specific context, we would want someone present from some type of customer support, because they're going to be the ones that hear about they're going to be the ones that hear the pain of customers when the chatbot doesn't work. So we want someone representative there. And I would say at least someone from IT, whoever's going to be responsible for maintaining the chatbot, would be the bare minimum of who we want in the room there.
And some of the context that we were talking about could be as simple as, is the customer who's using the chatbot identified? Do we even know their customer ID or something like that? Like, can they only use it when they're logged in, or something like that? Or are they identifying themselves? Or are they essentially anonymous when they're using it? And that would change all kinds of downstream decisions about privacy and things like that.
Exactly.
And
but we need
when you talk about it that way, it doesn't really feel that subjective anymore, does it?
Exactly.
Right? It's really just reducing what you're trying to do to writing and having the discipline to do that. All right. Let me see here. Oh, let's take a moment for housekeeping, but then I want to ask you kind of a fun question. And obviously I spent some time with the book, but well, you'll see when I ask the next question that I won't know anything about your answer, and I think it'll be a fun question for you. So I'll leave you in suspense for a second. I thought I would mention a couple of upcoming further events just to let everybody know. Best way to, of course, subscribe to the newsletter. This is always fun. We always have a follow-up. So we'll take this conversation. We'll grab highlights from this conversation. There'll be a second issue of the newsletter featuring Olivia. But also there are a couple of events coming up. Cal, who we've mentioned a couple of times, Cal Dubabe, who heads up data science and AI for us at Further, is going to be speaking at ODSC. I think we have a graphic for that. So that was the ODSC image. We can do that in a couple of minutes, or when it comes up, I'll comment on it some more. But we also have a couple of other Further colleagues that are speaking at conferences. So here's my next question that I think will be a fun one. When we first spoke, you mentioned that you're working on another book, but I really don't know anything about the new book. And it was a few weeks now, so you may. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is okay. So yeah, so here it is. By the way, this is one of our AI strategists that I was mentioning. This is Lauren, who's on the data science and AI team at Further. But we have a sister company, PMG, and Lauren and Brent are going to be presenting at the Data Science Salon. I don't know if you know anything about those events. I think you would like the vibe there. Those are really cool. Those are really cool events.
Yeah, I got to check them out. It's
the organizers are two women, which just happens to be something about those events, but maybe it's because it's two women or whatever, but it just has a very cool vibe. There's no breakout sessions. You spend the entire day all together, right? Even the venues I think are really cool, like they're in Austin and other places like that. Anyway, it's just it's the absolute opposite of the huge Vegas events where you feel like a molecule floating around in a suspension or something. At the Data Science Salon events, it feels much like hanging out with friends as a conference could. They keep it to about a couple hundred folks, and again, no breakout sessions. Everybody sees everybody's talk. They're just
kind of nice.
Yeah. So the Data Science Salon was one, and then we had a graphic on Cal at ODSC too, but we'll comment on that when we do it. So I interrupted you there. The new book, what is it all about?
Yes. So we've been talking a lot about what I would call responsible AI practices, where we're focusing on quite literally, it's like housekeeping. Can we keep the household functioning so that we can develop AI? Done. Again, not sexy, not interesting. I shouldn't say that. It is interesting. It's very straightforward. And like we've been breaking it down, it's not really subjective. It's very much getting just functioning pieces in place.
I think another way of putting it maybe is it's not as philosophical as people think. It's not.
Yes. There we
It's
go.
not
Yeah.
pondering the greatest good for the greatest number. It's reducing the goals of your project and the related context to writing, and then responsible behavior emerges out of that.
Exactly. It's, how do we get our intended use out of AI? So for me, that is very structural. It's very operational. It's what the first book was on. It's what a lot of my responsible AI work is on. And that's been really fun. But now I feel like I've scratched the itch. I have answered a lot of those questions for myself of how do you do this in practice? I wrote it into a book. I work with clients on it all the time. And because I come from the philosopher background, I always need a question, an uncertain question that I am chasing. And so for me, for my next book, that's where a lot of this inspiration is coming from. And so I actually specialize in a field called ethics by design. Responsible AI is all of these governance processes and so on. Ethics by design is a very creative process. It's looking at embedding our human values, designing AI systems to reflect our human values. And right now, how we practice anything around ethics by design is we pick a very specific value, again, like privacy. We're overusing privacy today, but like privacy, and we ask ourselves, okay, how do we design not to protect for privacy, but to align with it? How do we create privacy preserving features and so on? That's a lot of our focus on current ethics by design processes. Now, where my next book, what my current research is on and where the next book is headed is I'm looking at not necessarily what I call these kind of AI virtues or these AI values, the principles that you almost hear repeated over and over again. I'm looking at extending beyond those and coming back towards more human values, such as things like curiosity and compassion and creativity. And I'm looking at methodologies for how to not design an AI system that embeds those values, but instead, how do we design the environment supported by AI that pulls those values out of a person? So let me talk. I'll boil this down simply. So let's talk about curiosity, especially in the context of generative AI. People tend to default towards, well, generative AI, it's so curious. It can ask all these questions and knows all this information. What I want to look at is I don't want to make the AI curious. I want to create an AI system that pulls curiosity out of me. Curiosity is something that I value as a person. I love being curious. And this is me actually speaking subjectively now. I'm a very curious person. I love being in environments that makes my curiosity thrive. I'm attracted towards that. I'm pulled towards it. Now, I want to design AI that creates the environment in which my curiosity thrives because I'm going to be pulled towards, hey, this system actually gets me closer to who I want to be as a person. So where this next book is headed, and the not official, but the title that keeps sticking in my head is somewhere along the lines of 7 Virtues of AI, meaning I want to look at some of these specific human values and how do we design so that those are pulled out of us. Curiosity being one of them. If you can't tell, is one of my favorites that I default towards. But it's really looking at ethics by design, not for the system, but for the human experience at the end of the entire ecosystem that AI creates.
Yeah, so it sounds like it is also kind of happening more at an individual level than a enterprise level. Yeah,
exactly.
I think yeah, that's the graphic. So there's Cal, who we both know very well. Cal Al-Jubaid runs our data science and AI team, and ODSC has I know it says Gen AI X Summit, but it is at the broader ODSC event, which has always been important to us at Further and previous to that at a company called Pandata that Cal founded and was acquired by Further. So that one is going to be in the Boston area. This one is online, though, everybody. And I know some of the content that's being presented in this one. It's really remarkable. So a colleague of mine, Jason Tabling, is going to be leading this along with some colleagues of ours from our sister company PMG, and that's coming up very soon. That's if you're watching this on the 12th, it's next week, February 18th. We will provide links to all 3 of those events, the 2 in-location conferences, and then the webinar as well. Yeah, so I was just saying that seems like it's less about enterprises, which I think is fair to say that responsible AI really was looking at AI ethics through the enterprise lens, right?
Yeah.
But this next one will be more on an individual basis, and it sounds very, very intriguing.
Yeah, a lot of it is being inspired by this constant conversation, I want to say, that I'm having with people, where over and over again, I'm hearing people say, we have all these promises that AI is going to bring us all these amazing things. And where is that? People have this responsive, I feel like I'm missing something. There's a shallowness here. How do I get deeper? I'm missing something more. And they can't quite articulate it. But in the conversations that I have, if I can pull a little bit deeper, a lot of that is that disconnect between this technological innovation and that human impact, that sense of value, that sense of purpose. And so I'm looking at bridging that gap that has continued to form.
Very interesting indeed. So I want to ask you about AI ethics a little bit as a career, but through a particular lens. So
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that as these regulations codify, because I agree with you that there's this irony in saying that there's not enough regulation yet. It's because it hasn't settled. So it seems chaotic. It seems like there's a lot of it, but it's not always clear, especially with jurisdictional differences and everything. But once that dust starts to settle, I don't know about your guess, but I'm thinking we're going to need more people doing this task in 3 to 5 years. And I can't imagine that there's enough folks studying ethics to take on these roles. So there's probably going to be non-ethicists that cross-train or whatever form take this on. Where do you think the folks are going to come from that will perform this task within organizations that are doing AI at sufficient scale that they need a full-time person?
So they can come from a few different directions. And I know you're going to hate this. It depends on the needs of the company. But in some cases, some companies need more technical practitioners. So people that are actually going to be implementing technical solutions. So these are what I like to call the responsible technologists. And they usually come from a data science and engineering background. They've gone through different either training or experience where they've had to build out we'll talk about fairness. So they've had to test and mitigate different biases. Then that's a very technical solution, a very technical process. And in some cases, some companies really need that hands-on aspect. And so they'll be pulling people from the data science and engineering backgrounds. Other companies will be operating in highly regulated spaces. And so they can pull a lot of talent coming from more of a legal background, a legal and policy background even. And then I really see just a lot of humanities in general, which I know sounds very broad, but it's more about the ability to ask the right questions and listen for the actual needs instead of trying to come with a solution pre-made. So, for example, my job, I can't think of any aspect of my job that doesn't have some layer of co-design built into it, because it is not my job to come in and say, this is what you have to do. It's my job to come in with frameworks that we're going to fit and use, but I need to listen to what your needs are. I need to listen and be able to address the actual pain points in a way that works for you, not the way that I think it should be done, but I need to know what you're going to use at the end of the day. So and why I say the humanities background is a lot of the humanities training is asking why, asking well, what's the purpose of this? What's the need? Listening, forming arguments, forming critical critical thinking. It's really necessary in this space.
Well, another one of our colleagues fits that description, I think, quite well. She has a PhD in anthropology, but runs a Python, also runs a Python meetup, right? Yeah. So that really resonates with me. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I think we can just kind of have fun with it. So why do you think so many folks are fascinated? Well, there's usually two strong reactions to the whole existential robot. You mentioned that for years you had to tell clients that your job wasn't to talk about robots taking over the earth.
Yeah.
And I know that Cal will tend to roll his eyes when this comes up because he really thinks it's a distraction. And clearly that makes sense. But those tend to be the two reactions, either fascination or that's just kind of a silly topic, again, because there's other stuff we have to worry about, like the stuff that we spent most of the call talking about. So who do you think is doing the most interesting talking about that side of things? And what's your own take on it? Just as a fun way to end the conversation.
I know Cal and I are constantly crossing the globe, and we have figured out how to meet up in the most random places. We always seem to be crossing paths, and we'll sit down and we'll have this exact conversation of, all right, what's the most ridiculous thing you've heard in the past month or so? Yeah. Gosh, I mean, some of these can get quite chaotic. I have a running joke actually with some of my friends of how ridiculous of questions I can get asked, because apparently as an ethicist, it makes me a very approachable person, but also seems to put me in this weird sphere where people feel like I'm not necessarily a psychiatrist, but someone that you can come to with these really crazy thoughts and ask questions about. And so I have some crazy stories about how related is this to my field of research, and sometimes we can go way off in left field. I would say that I know Cal rolls his eyes. I actually use these kind of crazy examples sometimes to help catch attention and then use it as a reference point. So robots taking over the world, okay, then I can use that in context where people get stuck on conversations around AGI, or even just a simple like robotic arm company. Why is that something that we're fixating on? Sometimes in the field of ethics, it's easier to talk about these complex subjects in kind of crazy terms and work your way backwards to a little bit more of reality. I know that doesn't entirely answer your question, but it's a lot of different directions that this can go in.
Well, it's more of the freshman philosophy 101 type thing. Lots of talks about tables and chairs, and does this chair exist in the ethical equivalent of that? But part of it makes sense to approach in a normative way. Like the future of work, for instance.
Yeah.
How will we do that when possibly we need to work less? I'm not feeling it yet, by the way.
I know.
But that day eventually will come. I guess that's what
we hope.
Or start speculating. But anyway, that was just a fun way to wrap things up. Certainly I didn't lead with that because I didn't think that was our topic today at all. Even if clients in their initial meeting with you can't resist. Bringing it up. Yeah. So this was wonderful, and this is hopefully the beginning of a conversation with others. We often find that there's more, more activity in the chat after the event, and that's because how this goes. It pops up in everybody's LinkedIn feed, and then they watch it later today or this evening. Is quite common. So please have safe and hopefully efficient travel. I think you're back to the U.S. I know that the strike in Belgium was part of this issue that you were having. So we wish you better luck in the next couple of days.
Thank you. I seem to need it.
Yeah, and good luck with the upcoming book as well, which is obviously clearly underway. Okay,
Yes.
so please do stay in touch, everybody, and subscribe to the newsletter so you can catch the newsletter that talks about our conversation, which just concluded. Okay, thanks again, Olivia.
Thank you, Keith.